Welcome back to Comedian MTG. My name is Ian. On today's episode, we are breaking down the Independence Play 2K cEDH tournament over at King's Court Gaming. It's a super awesome store, and I absolutely love traveling up to Massachusetts to play in these tournaments. Because this was a 53-person tournament, it was a cut to top 10. I ended up making 11th in this tournament, so I figured I would at least tech my own deck as well as I have a bonus deck to talk about because it was mentioned in one of my previous videos and folks got really excited about it. A lovely gentleman by the name of CJ, who happens to go to the store, plays a Rakdos Lord of Riots cEDH deck, and a lot of folks requested it. When I had mentioned it had made top 10 in the last video, he didn't do as well this time around in this specific tournament, but he always does usually pretty decently at these things, and I figured we would definitely mention that deck and give him a shout out since last time so many people had asked for a deck tech on that specific list. One really cool thing about the King's Court is that they are actually having an 8K at the start of next year, so you'll probably hear me shout this out several times as we go through this process. They're doing 2Ks every single month at this store. It's pretty sweet, right? But yeah, an 8K in January of next year. Its registration is already available for it. It's looking pretty sweet, and from what I've heard, there's some talks about potentially making it a platinum event, which would obviously be really huge for the 2025 season as well. So there's a lot of really cool stuff. I would definitely snag your seats sooner rather than later, in case that does end up becoming a reality. I love this store truly, and it was really fun to be able to play there. Let's jump into talking about some of these decks though. So as I mentioned, we got to talk about, hello, is this Rowan? No, this is Rakdos, which is such a good name for this deck. This is Rakdos, Lord of Riots. For those who have never seen this commander before, understandably, it is a 6/6 for black, red, and you cannot cast this commander unless an opponent has lost life this turn. It is a flying trample 6/6, and creature spells you cast cost 1 less to cast for each 1 life your opponents have lost this turn. So unlike where you see the allusion to Rowan, this deck is trying to womp your opponents for a bunch of damage and then get a giant reduction on some of these crazy creatures that are in this deck. It's sort of like a Rakdos turbo list, right? And a lot of crazy stuff can come out of it, right? So you can already see here some giant very high colorless cost threats that exist in this deck. Things like Keurig and Void Winnower and Emrakul and Kozilek and Hoarding Broodlord, Runescarred Demon. So many giant payoffs, right? You have the Mikaeus and Triskelion package. You have Mikaeus and Walking Ballista is not in here, I guess. Oh, that's interesting. I would have thought it would be. You have Ancestral Statue, which is at a certain point infinite enter the battlefield abilities, right? So with certain payoffs, that just kind of pops off infinitely. You have a lot of really kind of quirky creatures here, things you might see in something like an Ob Nixilis to start pinging your opponents, meaning that you can actually cast your Rakdos. The way I see CJ often play this deck is it's sort of like a patient thing where you sort of establish a couple engines and then you kind of wait until it's the right moment to then go like, cool, ping, play Rakdos, hit my opponents for a bunch of damage, and then suddenly, oh wow, all my stuff is reduced by a lot of mana value. You know, things like Ruthless Technomancer turn into rituals in the deck. Runescarred Demon and Hoarding Broodlord and Razaketh are really big for the deck. It feels like those two help a lot in the, you know, converting, well, stuff costs less, how do you actually win though, sort of paradigm it has going on. There's so many really crazy things that this deck does. Plays a lot of crazy stuff like Treasonous Ogre. There's Liberator in here for flash lines with the deck, which is really fascinating because it says, you know, creature spells you cost 1 less for each 1 life your opponents have lost this turn, right? So if you actually have an instant speed thing going on, right, there's a world where, you know, your opponent takes 3 off of their mana crypt and suddenly Liberator is free on their turn. You flash that in, you just start absolutely popping off at instant speed. I've played against the deck several times now, as CJ has been a Massachusetts player for as long as I, you know, used to be playing cEDH in that spot, and the deck does some pretty crazy stuff. As I mentioned, didn't have a fantastic record this time around, but it was able to make top 10 of the last 2K they had in the King's Court, which also was like 58 players, right? So pretty impressive stuff for this super crazy over the top list. Congrats to CJ on making a really sweet deck, and I know there's going to be tons of comments asking questions about specific choices in this list. I know that he is pretty available to answer some of those, maybe not in the comments specifically, but I know, you know, if we ever want to do a full deck tech on this list with CJ, please feel free to comment down below so that I can know if y'all want to get deep in the spice for this one. So this is the list. I had 11th place, unfortunately falling just short of the top 10 cut, which was a little bit heartbreaking. But this is the Breakfast Warriors, Cal's new name for it, also being cEDH Moneyball. The idea here is that I came to our little group chat, which is Phoenix and Callahan and I said, hey, listen, I have this idea for a deck. I want to do a full Nadu in the 99 package, right? I said, I think Najeela is the commander that can use Lightning Greaves most effectively of any sort of 5-color commander that's out there right now, right? Maybe Sisay is like pretty close as well, right? But Najeela also generates bodies for Nadu, right? So I was like, all right, cool. So we have our Lightning Greaves, we have our Najeela plan, like that whole thing works. Then I said, well, we can actually layer it on top of the Nomads and Core and Cephalid Illusionist pile, because Lightning Greaves and Cephalid mills your entire library, Nomads and Cephalid mills your entire library, and then Nomads and Nadu means that you get free triggers on all of your creatures twice per turn with Nadu, right? So suddenly now we have like a 4-mana Seedborn Muse that we can make in the 99 of the deck, and essentially you get 2 Nadu triggers per creature, right? And that's starting to make something happen, right? And we were like, all right, let's fit it inside this Najeela shell. One of the mistakes I definitely made in the early version that has been corrected and updated into version 2, which you'll probably be hearing me talk about in the next video, as well as in a deck tech I did in the Mind Sculptors about this deck. We had, Chatterfang and a Johnny and a few more like very Najeela focused cards in there that were like very much focused on like the Najeela beatdown plan. And those got cut because the sort of thesis I realized at the end there was like, that's not what the deck is trying to do, right? We're trying to more so do like the 5-color mid-range storm thing, right? And not necessarily the beat down with Najeela plan, right? So that was definitely a mistake in the early versions of this deck. But the idea here is definitely we have our classic Najeela combos, the Grim Hireling and the Derevi and stuff like that, right? But there's a lot of tutors that basically allow you to get any of the breakfast pieces we talked about, right? The Illusionists or the Nomads, as well as are able to go grab your Nadu and a bunch of different stuff like that. So this deck has definitely been a passion project of mine for the past few weeks. It's really, really fun to play, and it's pretty strong. It's kind of been my current obsession, not gonna lie right now, and it's definitely a deck I'm really, really enjoying playing. As of right now, we're still working out some kinks. Hopefully by the time you see me talk about this deck next, I am in the top cut and not missing it by a single placement. But as I said, I've been really, really loving playing this deck. It's the first time I've ever really wanted to play Najeela. It's been not a commander I've been super interested in, but the different sort of style of Najeela that you get in this deck is really, really exciting. As I mentioned, it's a Thoracle deck. It's an Underworld Breach deck on top of all that stuff. One of the crazy things we were trying in this specific version was we were trying to not play LED Brain Freeze and only use the Breakfast combo as the way to mill your library, but definitely found that was not that part of the deck was not as successful as I would like it to be. So that sort of moved into the main deck as LED and Brain Freeze and stuff like that. So excited to tell more about this deck as I develop it and work on it. But as I mentioned, it's been one of the most fun I've had working on a new deck in a long time, and it's definitely a passion project of mine right now. Before we go into our official top 10, let's talk about Tales of Adventure Magic, a fantastic online store that has a wide variety of things available to you. It's got a crazy inventory. You can use code COMEDIAN at checkout to get 5% off of your order, and they have an amazing feature where you can actually pick up your cards at events. They're at things like Command Fests and pretty big events like Star City Games and stuff like that. So if you order something online and want to pick it up in person, not have it shipped to your store, if you're going to one of these large events and you want to pick up some singles with a great variety of inventory and really nice bling cards and all tons of stuff like that, check out toamagic.com. Once again, use code COMEDIAN, get a little bit off your order. Into our first deck in this top 10, we have Winota, but like cEDH by Lua Stardust. So Lua actually went up with me to Massachusetts to attend this tournament. She's been known to play a lot of these cEDH tournaments with me, and she was able to make the top 10 of this event. She's actually been hitting those top tables a few times in recent history with her Winota deck, and really, actually being one of the very few top cuts we're seeing from this deck in the modern age. So we have Winota here with I guess for those who haven't seen this deck in a hot minute, this is a beatdown stacks deck, right? Lua's list definitely known for still being on the Kiki Jiki lines, playing things like Lena and Angrass Marauder, stuff that allows you to really go over the top of your opponents and beat them down pretty aggressively. We have the brand new Flare of Fortitude for Modern Horizons 3. We've got, let's see, some other cards from Modern Horizons 3, the Witch Enchanter, which is an MDFC that also happens to be a human you can flip into with Winota. We have the ever lovely Philia Exuberant Shepherd, which is a Winota triggerer that also removes stacks pieces or flickers some of your own ETBs. A very, very valuable card there. And then we have the new Ocelot Pride, which I think Lou's still a little unsure about that one. The idea is it's a really early attacker for Winota that if you can start getting to the point where you're like thinking about triggering Ascend, the card gets out of hand pretty quickly. The idea with this deck is really to stacks the table down with some of your powerful effects like your Rule of Law effects, High Noon being one of the best pickups this deck has ever had. And I've actually been talking with a lot of people lately about how High Noon, if any card, is going to be the card that brings Winota sort of back from the dead. And here we are seeing it in Lua's version of this list. Apart from that, normal Winota beatdown stuff. I love seeing that the deck is still able to make top cut in the modern age. Oh, I guess we should mention Ajani's in the deck too. Multiple bodies for Winota, trigger it super early. The new Aven Interrupter is another one of those cards that gave the deck a decent amount of legs. I know she's been on Delny, and I feel like it's been sort of hit or miss whether that card is pretty effective, but it is nice when it gets your evasive attackers in under your opponents. And then sometimes it does crazy stuff like double Avens or, double War Bosses to make double triggers, double Philias. So there's definitely a decent amount of synergy that Delny has in the list. Deck number 9, we have Cat Says Ping Meow 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 by Nico Wonderland. If you recognize this deck, it's because we've covered it on the channel before. Nico has, let me say the real name. Nico has played this Roxanne list before and has sort of been the only person I know really championing this deck. It's a very solid mid-range Gruul list with the idea being you are using the meteorites that you make off of Roxanne to not only control the board by doing damage to your opponent's smaller creatures, but you're also using them to produce a lot of mana because she does that. You also have double the mana from your dockside lines. This deck is definitely, chock full of high value creatures, right? We have things like Etali in the 99. We have Godo lines with Helm of the Host, I believe. Yeah, there's a full Godo deck too. We have a Throne of Eldraine in here, a very aggressive Underworld Breach grinding station line, and even some aggravated Assault Winds with this commander as well. So there's a lot of pretty wild stuff going on with this Roxanne list. It's definitely playing a lot of stuff that is like, not traditionally looked at for a lot of these cEDH decks, but this is a big Gruul deck that really goes over the top of your opponents. And when you play cards like Rionia and Etali in the 99 and a lot of these crazy over the top cards like Roaming Throne 2, like you can really just get over the top of your opponents very quickly. As I mentioned, you have the Teamer dockside lines to be able to loop Roxanne over and over again and shoot your opponents to death with meteorites. You also have Squee Food Chain that does the exact same thing, right? Generates infinite creature mana, infinite cast of Roxanne, and then goes to town damage wise. Super cool to see Nico going and playing this deck a pretty consistent amount. Oh, we also have Luca in the 99. I love that. Being able to convert your Roxanne into either a Godo or an Etali is very, very spicy. A lot of crazy stuff from this list. Congrats to Nico for a top cut. We have Dynomander here with Grixis Pirates. Dynomander, someone y'all should be familiar with at this point, a pretty frequent flyer here at these top tables and a frequent player of this Grixis Pirate list. But the weird part is, I think there's an error here because I played against Dynomander in the Swiss and they were playing Tutor Chain Sisse during this tournament. So I think we have a bit of a clerical error here, which is rather funny. But yeah, I played against Dynomander playing Tutor Chain Sisse. There seems to be a deck registration error here. They've done very well with their Grixis Pirates list in the past, and it's definitely a list that we've covered. So I think we're just going to move on, but that's pretty funny. Yeah. We have Dire Swat here with Here Kitty Kitty. This is a Tivit list, and we haven't seen Tivit in a hot minute. In any of the decks we've sort of covered on this channel, Tivit's been sort of on a downswing as far as seeing play in the format. I think, it's just sort of struggling a little bit as these games get a little bit faster, and Tivit's really just a turn or two behind some of the other decks in the format. But here we have Tivit doing pretty well. Nuclear Fallout, one of the newer pickups for the deck, is a great way to basically replace Languish as a pretty commonly played board wipe in the archetype. We also have things like a bunch of our 4-mana value engines in the deck. A lot of the point of Tivit is to find what we call tiny Tivits, right? The small card advantage engines that allow you to sort of bridge the gap between when you're resolving a Tivit and when you're just grinding value out. Things like One Ring, Trouble in Paris, Mothering Tithe, Rhystic and Mystic, all of that stuff there helps to basically be the slowest Esper deck in the controlling fashion we kind of have. It's that really definitive, like, what does the most controlling end of the format look like? It usually looks like something like Niv or Tivit. And here we have Tivit making top cut, being the control deck of this cEDH pod. And congrats to our pilot here for making the top 16 cut. We have Key Kikaselo here with Crime Till I Die, killing crime and everything's fine. This is a Marchesa Dealer of Death list. As we mentioned with the Outlaws of Thunder Junction set review that I did on the channel, this was kind of a miss for me. I missed that this commander is actually pretty decent, but I've seen Marchesa a couple times in these pods, and it does put in good work, right? Whenever you commit a crime, you can pay a generic mana, and if you do, look at the top 2 cards of your library, put one in your hand and the other into your graveyard. Turns out there are actually a number of different ways to just make that go infinite, right? So that's it's pretty sweet stuff. A lot of the times you can do stuff like, I know, any sort of dockside loop in particular. Well, this is actually pretty interesting because normally I see Baron Master Wizard in these decks because that is one of the easiest ways to convert a dockside loop into infinite crimes committed, because what you'll end up doing is you'll do the Baron Dockside thing, generate infinite treasures, and then target one of your opponent's creatures over and over again, holding priority with Baron's ability to generate infinite Marchesa triggers and then draw you through your entire deck. But it seems like this version is not opting into going for that combo, nor do they have really any infinite dockside combos. We definitely do just have a fair amount of like Grixis good stuff here, right? Necropotence, Underworld Breach, all that kind of stuff. Amphibian Downpour, which is definitely a way to commit some crimes and shut off some commanders from your opponents. We have Conqueror's Flail here to shut off your opponent's interactions on those pretty aggressive Grixis turns here. This list is definitely really interesting. Surgical Extraction is not one I've seen maybe ever in a cEDH game, and Blue Elemental Blast there to take out your opponent's docksides and whatnot. Very cool list here that's doing a lot of stuff that I'm not usually expecting in this strategy. We have Mayhem Devil here, which is actually a pretty easy way to commit some crimes, because you crack a treasure, float a mana, target your opponent, and then use that mana to pay for Marchesa's ability. That one's pretty sweet and clean, and definitely a good way to be able to go infinite there. I think Stormkill Artist is there for very similar reasons. Hullbreaker Horror is an interesting one, because I think you can do some sort of nonsense if you make infinite mana with Hullbreaker, and then I guess you can do the dockside thing like we talked about, and you can also like bounce Bowmasters over and over again to infinitely not only deal damage but crime your opponents. Yeah, that one's kind of interesting to me. I'm not really sure what the exact use of that specific loop is. It feels more like a Italian, where like, yeah, you loop One Ring over and over again, or you loop Bowmasters over and over again, as opposed to just looping in a way which you sort of traditionally expected to in this deck. So this is kind of fascinating to me, because I really, a lot of the stuff I come to expect in Marchesa, like Baron specifically, isn't in this version of the deck. So kind of some fascinating stuff here from this Marchesa build. So congrats to our pilots in the top 10 and for taking a pretty atypical version of an already atypical deck and making a top cut with it. Everybody come check out Animate Columbus. It is going to be July 19th through 21st. It is going to be the Clash for Cash cEDH 10K. I will be there. I will be a guest at this event. They're also having another one in Raleigh literally the week afterwards. So there's multiple 10Ks being hosted by Misty Mountain Gaming. If anyone's been paying attention to the channel, I have been attending basically as many of these as possible, because they have been really awesome to work with. They're working with the entire judge staff of like every single major cEDH tournament that you've ever known. They have a great organizer who's really committed to trying to make more organizers in the cEDH space, right? So it is really cool stuff. Really enjoyed going to these Clash for Cash events. I believe they do count as gold events if you are still trying to get those last points for this season. I can't stress enough how much fun these have been, and Columbus is a pretty major area for cEDH at this point in time. So if you're headed out there to Columbus, check out this Animate event in Columbus. There's going to be the Cash Clash event, as I mentioned, but also the whole time there is going to be a GalaxyCon, right? And GalaxyCons are these giant Comic-Con style events. They're super fun to go to, super engaging. I'm going to be doing a D&D panel on Friday. I'm going to be working on a panel on Sunday with Louis Stardust as well. There's going to be so much stuff to do there, not to mention, once again, this giant 10K cEDH tournament. So please come check it out. There's going to be some really amazing stuff, and I can't wait to see you all there. I've been adoring these animate events. They have been the highlight of my months when I've been going to them, and yeah, I can't stress enough the GalaxyCon animate events with the Misty Mountain Gaming's been an amazing time, great tournaments, great prizing. Can't say enough great stuff. Our last deck before we get into our top 4 here today is the MH3 testing CySA list by Transcendental. Transcendental, a Massachusetts-based player known for playing the Clam Chowder strategy. And for those who are saying, Ian, what does that mean? For those who don't know, there is an entire different subgroup of CySA players who have been trying this strategy called Clam Chowder, which is much more akin to like NBC No Bad Cards Najila, right? Where it's a lot less about the traditional Tutor Chains lines, right? You don't see Amanatu, there's no Nicol Bolas, there's no Oath of Teferi, right? And if you're going to be using the CySA activations, it's going to be fetching up pieces like Teferi Time Raveler, you're going to be fetching up pieces like Derevi to gain a bunch of value, you're going to grab Emils, you're going to have Talions and stuff like that. Some of these lists are going all the way to ad nauseum, but this version does not seem to be doing so. It's basically the idea of like which 5-color commander fits the No Bad Cards shell pretty well. And this one definitely still does have CySA lines to it, right? Like Emil, Derevi Cradle, and Emil plus Dockside are all super clean ways to be able to win the game while also developing a CySA style game plan, right? But this deck also has a bunch of other cool stuff and pivots you can use. Your Chthonian Nightmare as a loop with your commander. Then this is also just like a 5-color good stuff breach deck too at the very same time, right? So there's a lot of really cool stuff going on with these Clam Chowder builds. You mostly see these in Massachusetts or at major events when the Massachusetts players are showing up to represent. There's a healthy amount of Clam Chowder players in this 5-color space working on these 5-color good stuff CySA lists out there. So really cool stuff to see another Chowder list out here. Congrats to our player for having the highest record of those who did not make the top 4. This is our top 4 deck of a Niv Mizzet Perrin deck. Kind of surprised to see Niv up at the top of these tables and really pleasantly surprised to see that. It is a deck that has been not really putting up a ton of fantastic results as of late, and here we have a Niv list up in this top 4. The idea being this is the classic controlling Niv that we've grown to love. Let's see how many instants. Got a 37 instant, 4 sorcery, so 41 cards in your deck are triggering your commander, drawing you cards and pinging your opponents for damage. Got a bunch of value creatures here. This deck definitely an insanely heavy on Dockside style deck. You have Displacer Kit in there for basically that same reason as well. We have Nezahal Primal Tide as your backup Niv in case things go wrong in that department. Then you also have your Niv combos, right? Things like Tandem Lookout. You should usually have Curiosity and Ophidian Eye as well. That if those get onto your commander and you cast any sort of instant sorcery or deal any sort of damage to your opponents with Niv, you then start to draw through your entire deck and accrue a pretty ridiculous amount of value. That's really the only way that the deck has to like actually win the game, apart from just burn, just physical Niv Mizzet style burn, ripping through your deck, drawing a bunch of cards and doing all that kind of nonsense. So pretty cool to see a Niv list do pretty well in these tournaments. I'm always surprised by the lack of backup win condition in these lists, but here we have a Niv list in the top 4 playing some really interesting stuff here. I definitely have never seen like a Machine God's effigy in the deck, maybe just a mana rock that also can clone some of your opponent's best stuff. Pretty sweet here. Moon Silver Keys, sort of the other one that's pretty interesting. I assume that's just to grab Jeweled Lotus because yeah, I mean, it's a pretty mana hungry deck, being triple red, triple blue to cast your commander. So I imagine just grabbing a J-Lo at some point really helps to make that curve a little bit easier on your opponents. Yeah, it's pretty cool to see Niv in this top 4, and definitely excited to talk about the rest of the decks in this top 4 as well. The Older Gaming has a 10K LCQ at the end of this month, July 27th and 28th. One crazy thing about this is there are currently like 20 people signed up for this event. This is a 10K. This is a $10,000 prize point. This is a last chance qualifier to get these gold points for the Top Deck Invitational. And once again, $1,000 on the line here, right? This is a 10K and currently not a super amount of signups. So y'all get your tickets now. Go show up to this 10K and just collect. It is at the Charlie's Collectibles show in Stone Mountain, Georgia. And yeah, definitely go check it out. I will be at the Raleigh event, like I mentioned, that weekend, but they will have guests like Lamoro's Cards there. It's going to be pretty crazy stuff. As mentioned, $3,100 to first place and a bunch of other prizes to the other participants of this tournament. Y'all should definitely show up. It's a very, very, very awesome event. It's got a huge prize pool. Really sweet stuff on the line. So go check it out. The description for every event I've mentioned today also will be in the description down below. In third place here, we have Big Bear 360 RS with Etali's top of the food chain, and Etali made the top 4 of this cEDH tournament. And as you all probably know, I'm geeking out. I love my Etali list. I love seeing other people play this Etali list. Let's talk about the deck here today. So immediately, Etali Primal Conqueror is the, only black list turbo deck, it really feels like, in the format right now. It is the only turbo deck that is just in these Gruul colors, and this deck is trying to slam and jam. It goes infinite with Dockside and any sort of Dockside repeater, because then you can pick up your Etali and play it over and over again. It also has featured the Squee and Food Chain combo that we mentioned earlier in the episode, and the rest of the deck is just trying to aggressively jam Etali, right? This is a deck that is focused on making a bunch of mana, getting an Etali, getting multiple Etalis, and just doing the whole thing over and over and over again. As many people know, this is one of my favorite decks in this format. I truly love this deck so freaking much. It's so much fun to play. You have to basically play Storm with a non-deterministic Storm because you're using your opponent's cards to be able to combo off in this deck. Rhythm of the Wild, definitely an interesting one I haven't seen yet in this strategy, but pretty good here. Also the lowest amount of lands I've ever seen in an Etali deck. I think I'm on like 27, but still, like, 23 with 3 of them being MDFCs is definitely on the lower side of the format. But as I mentioned, it's a turbo deck, so it does make a lot of sense, even though you have 7 mana commander in the command zone. Yeah, I'm super happy to see Etali doing well at these tables. I love this deck so freaking much, and it's so cool to see it see play here. I know there's a lot of folks out there innovating and working on this deck, and I think it's just been too long since I've sleeved it up for a tournament, but congrats to Big Bear here. Yeah, this is sick. We have Enchantments Tribal Tameshi cEDH by Kaiser. Kaiser, y'all may recognize as someone I talked about in our last top 4 from King's Court. Not someone who gets out to a ton of cEDH tournaments, but a kind of brilliant player. I know they work pretty closely with Nadestrom, who is Jason Baird, one of the top players on the leaderboard right now, who has basically only been playing Tameshi for months and months and months. And yeah, Tameshi Reality Artifact here. For those who have not seen this deck, it's a silent killer. It's a popular deck, and it's really kind of hard to describe because it's one of those decks that goes from sort of just getting some value on the table and like sort of playing a controlling blue-white role to then just, okay, well, I'm going to pick up this land out of my graveyard and then play this thing and then get a free thing out of my graveyard and then loop that over and over and over again. And suddenly I've made infinite mana and I'm drawing my deck with my commander. And it just sort of makes that transition in a way that it's really hard to sort of follow, I think, for a lot of folks. There are some cleaner, more straightforward combos in the deck, which is just like Teferi Displacer Kitten and like Hullbreaker Horror and your commander, right? Like those ways, pretty easy to sort of wrap your head around those specific strategies, right? There's a bunch of combos in the deck with Lotus Bloom and specifically with your lands that are also artifacts. So specifically the Mirrodin ones, which, like Seed of the Synod, and then the other one, who actually doesn't seem like they're on the white one anymore, which is kind of interesting. Oh no, Ancient Den, there it is. Sorry, it's right there up at the top. I was like, that's interesting. It's a really good combo piece. Your artifact lands to see the sign on Ancient Den. You also have sometimes folks play Treasure Vault. This one does as well. It's a lot of really crazy sort of graveyard based wins in here. Mind Over Matter is a combo in the deck too, where you like pick up one land, discard the other land, and like do a bunch of stuff where you're cycling that over and over again. The deck's really good at just like basically entombing relevant artifacts and enchantments, not through cards like Entomb, right, but specifically through just getting them, playing them pretty early, cracking them, all that kind of stuff, and then just assembling sort of a critical mass of these pieces, kind of while it's looking like they're not really doing anything too threatening, and then just looping the stuff over and over and over again. This deck gets to play some pretty interesting stack pieces like Torpor, Vexing Bauble, all that kind of stuff, but it's definitely not what I would consider a heavy stacks deck. Definitely much more in that blue-white mid-range style strategy, and a list that once again is really hard to be able to pin down exactly where the choke points are on it, and that's kind of one of the best parts about it. Definitely a very commander reliant deck, right? So, you know, if you're curious about how to stop your local Tameshis, hitting them where it hurts in the Tameshi is a pretty good place to start. But congrats to Kaiser on your another top 4 on this Tameshi list. As I mentioned, very good player, one to look out for, and very solid at knowing this Tameshi list, which is not an easy deck, but making it look easy by just putting up a ton of wins on it. We have TurtlePod here with SNC, NECC, Director's Cut, Casey, July. You may recognize TurtlePod as we just covered his deck in the top 16 of Cowtown. So TurtlePod coming in here and winning this Independence Day tournament on Clam Chowder Sisay once again. Now this version of Clam Chowder Sisay is a little bit different than one we talked about earlier because this is a Nas Sisay, right? It's got the intuition stuff like we mentioned before and testing out the new Apple of Eden, something that is both tutorable with Sisay and a pretty big advantage engine over there. This version on a few less of the like legendary synergies than maybe our previous version was. Like the other version felt like a little bit more into that like hybrid space between Clam Chowder and Tutor Chains, whereas this one is very much the 5-color good stuff shell that happens to also just be really good at doing the Sisay thing when it needs to, right? Sometimes you just have to tutor up the Teferis and secure your win, right? Tiny Bones, definitely like the most often seen in these Clam Chowder lists. TurtlePod definitely doing very well with this 5-color Clam Chowder list, and a list that he's been playing pretty well with for quite some time. He just missed the top cut at the Boil by like, I'm pretty sure a draw, making the top 16 of Cowtown, and now winning this 2K here in Massachusetts. So congrats to TurtlePod. Really putting up numbers with the deck that you're very passionate about is pretty solid, and obviously making the deck look pretty good here at this tournament. So congrats to our first place player, TurtlePod, and that's our 2K. Let me know what y'all thought of this 2K. What were the decks that interested you? What were the things that really stood out here? I think there's a lot of really interesting stuff. I'm excited to talk more about obviously the list that I brought to this tournament and sort of the changes that I make to it going forward. I think there's a lot of really sweet stuff that we have going on in the format, and a lot of really different decks here. One of the reasons I really enjoy going to King's Court is that you get a wide variety of people playing a wide variety of decks, and it's just an awesome environment. The owner, Steve, is a really sweet dude who makes a really fun environment to go and play cEDH. You've actually probably seen Alan from Mental Misplay does a little bit of coverage on these tournaments, and as I mentioned, they've got a space for an 8K coming up in January. Y'all should go check that out. I'll leave all the info for that in the description of this video. But thank you all for watching this video. Big shout out to King's Court for making this video happen. Big shout out for also letting me get in to that tournament. Super happy to see all of these players here make the top cut, especially my partner as well, squeezing into the top 10 with Winota, which was a really cool thing to see as well. So a lot of really cool stuff here to talk about in this tournament. Thank you all for watching this video, and I will catch you next time. Peace.
I know I've been quiet for a minute. I've been grinding, still in it. I've been counting these digits. Excuse me. I know I've been quiet for a minute, but I'm back on my business. If you see me, don't trip, just excuse me. Wrong if I do, wrong if I don't. That's why I do me no matter what. So excuse me. Lie if I do, lie if I don't. The proof is in the story. Take a seat. Excuse me.